let's talk about the new GH7.
Yes.
I've got a few reasons why it was in my cart and I was going to buy it, and then I've got a few reasons why it's no longer in my cart, and I chose not to buy it.
I would love to hear the reasons.
Well, what was your first impression of the GH7 when it was announced?
When it was announced, finally, like the first word that came to mind was it's about time, So obviously we've talked about it, all the features that we've wanted in the GH6, which obviously didn't come in the GH6, right? The focusing system, we wanted upgraded. So now, obviously, they have a few more features that were pretty interesting, right? The new XLR adapter has the 32-bit float audio. So, I mean, there's other features with an added expense, of course. But, yeah, no, I'm interested to hear why you don't want it anymore, considering you got the G9 Mark II, which has a few of those features that we were waiting for. So,
Yeah.
the phase detect autofocus, I don't know.
So I think this is interesting context for this conversation because you owned a GH1 before I even knew you. I had a GH1. It was my first, kind of mirrorless hybrid style camera. So we both started with Lumix before we knew each other, and we've been shooting with the GH4, the GH5.
I almost went Nikon. It was the D90, I think. It was like one of the other first, 1080p recording cameras at the time, but yeah, no, it's Lumix.
And you like to shoot with Sony a lot. I use Sony from time to time. We've been shooting with the GH6 now since that came out.
Oh yeah, for years.
A couple of years ago.
Still shoot with it.
I think 2021 was when that came out. And so huge Lumix Micro Four Thirds fans. Neither one of us has upgraded to the full frame Lumix offerings, but Micro Four Thirds has been part of like our toolkit for over a decade now, probably professionally and for personal work as well.
Yes, I feel like people in our industry, it's like you build up so much equipment, so many lenses in a specific system that it is difficult to switch. So obviously when Lumix was announcing their full frame and everything, but then switching different lenses and different, it's like I do like my lens kit, and I, again, don't want to go through like the hassle of selling everything and switching over. So for the most part, yeah, it's like we do shoot other systems, but still the full frame Lumix never really got me. Maybe, I don't know, but
we can talk about that because that's maybe.
Is that what you have in your cart now? You have the.
We'll see. But
X.
I think it's something to be said for coming from avid fans of Micro Four Thirds. We have, I think, some of the most expensive Micro Four Third lenses ever made, some of the best lenses ever made. We've been shooting with this stuff for years and years and years. So a natural progression would be a GH7, which has been on my wish list for years, right? Because everyone's known Lumix autofocus, continuous autofocus in video is terrible.
Yeah, it's contrast based. Not great.
Even on the GH6, for as much as improvements were made, it still was no good. And finally, they started adding the phase detect on the S5 Mark II, and then it came to the G9 Mark II. So I did buy that. And I think the kind of thing that put me over edge there was the discount, the price at the time.
Yes.
There's the $500 discount on B&H or wherever it was. So it was like $1,500. I was like, okay, that's the right price for this camera, which I think I made a video at the time. The G9 Mark II was just too expensive. And so the GH7 gets announced, and there's three big features from my perspective, which is the phase detect autofocus, or they call it phase hybrid, or they call it something, but it's phase detect. They've got the RAW internal recording, which I believe is ProRes RAW.
Yes.
And the 32-bit float audio. Everything else, the
mean,
body style.
Enhanced stabilization, there is that. The more increased dynamic range by like a stop.
Oh,
so
right. It's using basically all the features that they added on the G9 Mark II, the dynamic range boost working across all the ISOs.
It's constantly on unless you go past 60 frames per second or something like that.
Right.
But
so it's the G9 Mark II with the fan, with the flippy screen, with the kind of GH6 body style. It has those extra features. So I was like, okay, is this the camera I want to buy right now? I'm looking at the price point and going, again, they're missing. It's the wrong price. If it was under $2,000, if it was around that $1,500 price point.
How much of it is just inflation? Like, how much of it is just things costing more?
Yes.
Versus they think that they're charging the right amount because of the features.
I think at this point, if you want to differentiate between a G9 Mark II, which I've also talked about, the problem with it is that it overheats. It doesn't have the same thermal cooling that the GH6 and now the GH7 have. I just think...
For video.
I think if you look at it on paper, the specs, the things that are touted, okay, raw internal recording, let's start there, because that's something I probably won't use. I don't know about you.
I won't know.
Why?
The people, at least that I've watched reviews from, it's mainly just for color aspect of it, which coloring isn't necessarily something that we dive deep into. And if it was, maybe I'd be more interested in shooting raw for that specific like information. But when it comes to raw, I was actually watching a few different videos of like different camera systems that have like what does raw actually mean, right? So on certain camera systems, it makes sense, especially when it comes to like ISO on like a red camera, for instance. It's like you're not going to get a different like grain to your image because all the ISO, like you can add and post, subtract, whatever, you can raise it, lower it, but it still has that same look and texture. Versus like if you're using a Lumix system, which isn't already great in low light, it's like if you're messing with that ISO, it's going to noticeably look different and everything. So the raw, when it came to that, I was like, I don't know if that's a good selling point. If I wanted to play with raw, I would get a camera that I can actually play in raw, like that raw color for added color information. That's not as important to me in that camera system. So it's not a good selling point for me personally.
Yeah, and I think I would agree, but maybe for a slightly different reason, or maybe it is the same and it overlaps. But for me, the value of Micro Four Thirds has been the kind of professional features at a budget level. So we've been shooting Micro Four Thirds for the longest time, doing professional paid client work, delivering high quality video content for paying clients, and they've always been happy. No one's ever looked at it and been like, "Oh, you didn't shoot this with an Alexa," or you didn't shoot. They're just like, "This is a great video." But we're very happy.
We do our best to make sure the colors are accurate.
Of course,
because that's the issue that you do have with a lot of these cameras that are prosumer or consumer, is because you don't have that control in post processing, right? The raw and everything like that. So yeah, we do dial things in, which shows, right? The final product, you're like, oh yeah, this I don't even know what this was shot on, right? So
controlling the lighting, controlling the color, getting it more or less right in camera. And the added cost associated with shooting raw kind of goes hand in hand with those more expensive cameras. So if you're shooting Arri or Red or any of these, oh well, it's raw. Well, okay, now your media is more expensive because you're going through cards faster. Typically the camera is more expensive and it's usually bigger, so it needs more expensive batteries that are also bigger. Typically that comes with more expensive lenses, and like everything just gets bigger, heavier. And even though stuff has shrunk over the years, there's still that difference between Micro Four Thirds run and gun on something like the GH5, where you just get it right in camera, you're shooting to an SD card, everything is streamlined, versus, okay, now I can shoot raw on a GH7, let's say. But now my file sizes are bigger, so I'm going to go through cards faster.
Or you can write on an SSD.
You can
just
right
directly to
where am I storing all that? I've got to set up a QNAP, which we also use. But even that gets maximized out at like 100 terabytes or 200 terabytes, right? You can kind of keep building your infrastructure, and it gets more and more expensive. And we're already maxing that infrastructure out using the lower end, codecs, because a lot of stuff we're recording is more documentary style. It's more longer takes.
I mean, that might be an issue for us specifically.
It is,
because I don't know, a lot of the content creators I know, and I use that term specifically, content creators, because that's what they do. They shoot very short amount of content for a client, because usually it's social media, and it's not like what we do is very long. It's like a whole day, if not more than one. Just continuous shooting for hours. So it's
with multiple cameras.
Right. So it's that the storage aspect is something that we've definitely had to like deal with a lot over the years, because I used to think a terabyte was a lot of space, and then very quickly that became like a project for us could be easily over 500 gigabytes. So it's not small projects by any means. But then when you get to content creators who shoot like an hour at a location, and then they put it on their hard drive and it's like 50 gigabytes, it's like, I'm sure a 4 terabyte hard drive is going to last you a long time doing something like that. So for us specifically, it is interesting, because we do have like a huge essentially server of terabytes of information that we've filled with Micro Four Third footage.
H.264, granted, some of it's 10-bit, it is 4K, but it's trying to find that balance between, okay, what's overkill, what's underkill.
Right.
Even just last week, you did something where all the files were 1080, and it was still 500 gigabytes, So the storage cost adds up over time. And I think this is where you actually find that difference between, even in the photographer landscape, where a lot of people will say, I just shoot JPEGs. Because, and
it depends what
you're doing, right?
Yeah. And
so you have to find that balance of what makes the most sense. Are you trying to get it right in camera, just shoot JPEGs so you can deliver faster, you're not wasting quote unquote hard drive space, or do you want to shoot raw and have more fine-tuned control? For video, those numbers for me just inflate too much. So if I get a GH7 and I have the raw internal recording, that's a great feature for some people, but that's not a great feature for me.
Right.
I will probably never use it.
Same.
I'm going to shoot the same way I always have. So that's selling point feature list number one. Immediately not important to me.
Yeah. Right.
Let's go to selling point number two, 32-bit float audio. Ooh.
This is something that I am actually interested in. So you say what you got to say about it, and then I'll...
Great selling point. 32-bit float audio, cool. I love it. Oh, but wait, this isn't on the GH7. This is on the GH7 if you combine it with the XLR module, which is an extra $500. So you're not paying, GH7 price is like $2,200 or something like that.
Yeah, just for the body,
You're adding $500
on top of that
for one feature. Granted, it gives you the expanded 4 channels of audio.
Yeah, if you don't already have it. For me and you, we already had an XLR adapter, like the first version. So like that sucks. And of course, nobody's going to want necessarily that one, probably, because why would they buy an older version, like a used older version? I could still use it. I could find a use for it. But if I'm going to be using the new use for it, right, the 32-bit float, ideally, I would want to buy the new one. So yeah, you're right. It adds up a lot more than the initial, like, oh yeah, it's just a couple $1,000s. And then it's like, oh, it's more closer to $3,000 now.
Right.
Just for the body, essentially.
So we're getting close, because basically plus that adapter, plus tax, you are looking around $3,000.
Plus the other added, we're going to get to it later, but there's another added expense that we'll get to.
Which is what?
If you want to play around with the Arri log
profile,
right.
So there you go.
Which is another $200?
Another $200 for the C-Log.
For the license.
3?
Of the log, yes, of Arri log.
So you can shoot with the Arri profile. Now, we should talk about that in depth, which I think we will get to, because I've played around with it already.
I don't think it's that important.
Right, but
a lot of people have already unlocked it.
Yeah, let's just stay with so $3,000 all in, extra modules, extra profiles, whatever, for a Micro Four Thirds camera. Nikon, Sony, and Lumix in the same Panasonic Lumix ecosystem. There are full frame cameras that do most of these same things on a base level, not some of these newer features. Full frame cameras that are half that price.
Yes.
The S5 Mark II, Lumix, it's like a $1,500 camera right now. Full frame.
Yeah.
It's either...
But then you have to buy all their lenses.
Twice the sensor size or 4 times, depending on how you want to map it out. But basically a sensor that is, 4 times larger.
Yes.
I think, or 2 times. I don't know. However you want to map it out. For half the price, that does basically everything. Yeah, granted, lenses are part of that as well. But when I'm looking at that, I'm going, okay, so really, what am I actually getting with a GH7 base, body only? I don't want to count these...
Autofocus.
You're
getting autofocus.
I already have on the G9 Mark II, and you already get on something like the S5 Mark II. So what I did... Because I was looking at it, I was like, oh man, GH7, great. It checks all the boxes, it has all the features. But at a price point for me that is too high to justify in today's landscape. Yeah. You talked about inflation before. Absolutely. But Nikon,
but then you compare Sony, the other cameras, and the other cameras are still less.
Right, so the full frame ones.
Yeah, exactly.
So I went and put a S5 Mark II used, which is, I think it was like $1,300, maybe $1,500. There's the Sigma. I actually really like this lens. I think I have to do some more testing, but I like the potential of it. Sigma makes a lot of cool lenses. I've always thought that. The classic 18-35 for APS-C cameras was amazing on the GH5 with the speed booster.
I have a ton of Sigma Sony.
For Sony, right.
Class, yeah.
The 28-70 is a very interesting lens to me.
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily need something ultra wide all the time, but I like the size of it. Small, compact,
The full frame.
28 to 70. It's, I think, 200 grams less than like, I don't know. To compare it, you could compare it. Like I was looking at the 24 to 70 because there isn't really a full frame lens that matches the 10 to 25 micro four thirds. There's nothing quite like that. No. But I'm going to try and do the most with the 28 to 70. And also really, not really affordable, but more affordable. You can get a full frame camera with a full frame lens for cheaper than what like a GH7 just body only will cost you.
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of the writing on the wall of this is not the right price. And guess what's going to happen? GH7 will come out, and just like every other camera, used, because everyone's buying them probably for doing reviews and whatnot, and then they're going to sell them used, and slowly that price will creep down more to like the 1800 or 1500. And I probably will get a GH7 at some point, but I won't probably buy it new. And I think that's a mistake on Lumix's part. I think it's priced too high for not enough features. The one thing that would have sold me, I know you know what it is. What would have sold me? Why would I have bought the GH7? What's one feature they could have added that would have been like, I'm sold?
One more feature?
The only feature that
have we talked about it?
Oh yeah, all the time.
And not focus because it has that.
No, it has. That's like given at this point.
Feature that you would want.
It needs the internal ND.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, I guess that's a lot to ask.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
What other small? I don't think. Well, an internal ND.
Electronic ND.
I'm like, oh, okay, yeah,
not
that
a
makes sense.
filter wheel.
Because
electronic
I keep
ND.
thinking like a physical filter wheel. I'm like, there's no way. But yeah, an electronic one. I'm sure they could figure that out, right? Sony did.
Yeah.
So why not?
Granted, it's only for the more higher end, expensive, professional. But those are the features that I think Micro Four Thirds has always excelled at, where you'd say, okay, I'll take the crop because back in the day, we were doing things like 4K 60 before 4K before anyone else, right? Yeah. The GH4 had 4K in a price point and a form factor that was way more attractive than Red, or I'm trying to think any other 4K cameras at that time when the GH4 came out. And then the GH5, you got 10-bit, 4K 60. It's always taken those professional features and brought them down to a more consumer level price point, and you say, okay, I'm willing to deal with the crop sensor because I'm getting all these professional features. Now we're just crop sensor. Everyone's kind of got the same features more or less, and they're kind of grasping at straws like, well, now you got 32-bit float.
Yeah.
Only if you buy the adapter. Well, okay, that's not really a feature. Okay, now you got RAW. Well, I don't really need RAW anymore.
Because I really think that 32-bit float is a really cool feature, but I don't think they promote it in a way that would get people to actually purchase it for the feature. I would think it'd be a great podcasting setup. You set up that camera with ultra wide lens, the 10 to 25, whatever it is, and then you put that on top and have just a couple of mics plugged directly. Like, I feel like that's like the ultimate
podcast
setup.
Camera,
yeah, for a podcast. Instantly set up. You don't have to worry about your levels whatsoever. I think it's a perfect interview camera. Set it up. So it's like all those like aspects of using it for what it's actually intended for. They don't talk about it whatsoever. And it's like, oh yeah, raw. It's like, but it's not, it doesn't have that great dynamic range to begin with. So like, don't promote RAW to me if it's not a camera I can like conceivably be like, yes, I would love to shoot RAW with this camera, because that's not something that I'm like, oh yeah, Micro Four Thirds camera I'm going to shoot RAW with. Not unless you tell me it has like 15 plus dynamic range. You know, it's like, what are we doing here? You know, it's like, give me like, do more tests with the stabilization. Like I would love, because you have more room to play with in the body with a smaller sensor. So it's like that kind of stuff actually is of interest to me personally. But then like you were showing me stuff from like the Bear, and it looks like somebody took a camera and just turned stabilization off. And I was like, well, if that's the look nowadays, then like, what are we doing trying to make everything so stable?
Yeah, there's oftentimes this weird phenomenon in the industry where the features come so late in the game that we've already adapted. So 32-bit float does have its uses. I think it's a great feature to have access to, but it's not the game changer that it would have been maybe 5 or 10 years ago when we were actually struggling with these things. But everyone's kind of learned to like work around it, and there's things you can do. And so it's not a feature that I'm looking at going, I need that. Same with RAW. I don't need it like I once thought I did, because I've just been working around those limitations for so long that I've gotten really good at not needing something like that.
Well, I think that's part of the problem, right? We got really good at finding all the other pieces of equipment that make our lives easier. But then when the company finally designs something that solves those issues, there's no need to purchase it usually, because it's like, well, I already have the infrastructure. And then the new people coming up don't care necessarily because they're going to do it a completely different way, to begin with, right? It's like we make fun of the people that do like interviews on the streets, and they'll just have the microphone right in front of their, which granted, obviously we have these microphones in front of our face, but this is obviously intentional. Like, this is the podcast look, right? But it's funny when they just have a microphone, the lav mic, and they're just going back and forth like, oh, so what do you think? And it's just like, what are you doing, guy? But if nobody cares, clearly, like, nobody in the comments is saying like, hey man, like, you should really hide that microphone. That's unprofessional. Nobody says that. So it is very interesting, like, talking about like these things that like bother us, but they don't seem to be bothering the people that are coming up making content. Like file space and storage. A lot of people coming up, they don't even think about it.
Well, they might
Granted, if they're not professional, maybe that's the thing that, is preventing them from becoming a professional. But
yeah, there's a whole lot of people who record a lot of content, finalize the project, and then delete the raw files.
Right.
I don't think we've ever done that. We've never done that.
But I don't know. We use the content. We reuse
over and over
content.
and over, yeah.
So I don't know. It's probably of interest of us to like keep it, somewhere. But most people I know nowadays, they don't necessarily keep their footage or don't care to.
Yeah, it's hard for me to recommend a camera because it's not the G9 Mark II. It overheats too much for me.
The GH6.
The GH6 doesn't have phase detect, so I wouldn't recommend that. The GH7 has all the features I would want, but the price is too high.
I do like the GH6 if you're going to use manual focus lenses, anamorphic. Like, they're a great camera to shoot anamorphic on, just to get like test the waters of anamorphic, because
That's true.
It has all these other features.
And GH6s are cheap now.
Yes, yeah.
The S5 Mark II, I don't have it yet, so I have to do some more testing. I want to actually check. The one thing I'm concerned about is the sharpness of the lens. So that 10 to 25 lens, beautiful lens, incredibly sharp. I want to test Micro Four Thirds 10 to 25 compared to the S5 Mark II in this 28 to 70. If it is the same detail resolving power, I'll be happy. But if it's, if the lens isn't up to the snuff, and
I don't know if that's as much as the lens as it is the like the actual like sensor, right?
No, it's absolutely the lens, because even coming from the classic example in Micro Four Thirds that everyone ran for the longest time was the Sigma 18 to 35 with a speed booster, right? It's a great look, shallow depth of field.
But with the speed booster, so it's like going through another lens essentially,
right? Because you're getting that extended field of view, the wider field of view. You're getting the shallow depth of field.
In my mind, I would think like, oh, you're putting it through another lens, you're distorting it more, as opposed to using like a dummy adapter where you just get the lens.
Either way, that 10 to 25 is significantly sharper than the 18 to 35 from my testing.
Yeah.
So I want to see, because people often say, well, full frame, there's more detail, there's more dynamic range. I really have to compare it myself, because there's very few people that do the test that I would want to see. But if it actually holds up, if the lens is good enough and the camera performs as I think it should, then I think that'll be my new setup that I run with for a little bit to see how it goes.
I always get, I don't know, not like confused by looking at the footage or anything, but like if I shoot something on my Sony A7S III and look at the footage, the raw footage, compared to my like my GH6 footage, even though they're both like sharp as can be, different lenses, right? 10 to 25 versus any of my Sony lenses, the Sony footage always looks so much sharper just because of the resolution. Obviously, it's like it just looks cleaner.
On the A7S III?
A7S III, yeah.
Oh, weird. I have the like complete opposite perspective.
Even shooting at like a low ISO on my GH6, it just looks like noisier, It's like it just looks sharper on the Sony just because of the clarity. But it might just because like the lenses I'm using might just be like so shallow. But even then, if I'm looking at like the out of focus portions of my GH6, like the sensor itself just is noisier, even at the lowest ISO. But compared to Sony's lowest ISO, it just looks cleaner, therefore sharper. But that's only when I'm looking at it full screen. I can't tell when I'm watching it on my phone though, which I don't know. I feel like a lot of people no one can tell. You can't tell. No one's going to be able to tell.
I was never happy with the A7S III and the resolution comparing photos, because I think that's the truest form. I mean, I kind of saw it a little bit in the video, which could ultimately come down to compression. Like, how's the codec implemented?
The second base ISO isn't as great. Like, for as much as people say, like, oh, it's just as clean. It's like, no, it's not. No. It's not at all.
And then we ran into weird issues with some stuck pixels.
Yes.
That was super annoying.
Only on the second base ISO.
On the Sony, which is...
that sucked.
Yeah.
But,
we've also had weird issues, and this is true for every camera, I suppose, but also just getting the Sonys to match using like the S-Cinetone, like between the different camera
we've been running into
why
that.
Does the, and it's funny, the A7
reds are different, the oranges are different.
Yeah, the A7 IV looked better color wise than the FX6 in the reds and the oranges, which was interesting to try and problem solve that. And then we run into the Sony menu nightmare on the FX6 where you're like, I found the third gamma slider.
Oh my god. Yeah. So, I don't know why they make it so complicated.
Those are the things that always keep me away from Nikon and Sony. And for the technical features, I've always compared them to kind of like a TV remote, where it's really annoying to use, and you're trying to find like, where is this freaking setting?
It's professional.
And I've never
so professional.
I've never had that issue on the Lumix cameras.
Which is funny because like the higher the Sony cameras go, like the FX like 8 and everything, like they do add more buttons which do make it easier. Like they're physical buttons that make it easier, so you don't have to like dive into the menus. But yeah, it's the FX6 menu is just, I don't know why they have to make it so difficult. Just make it like any of the other, like, you know, less professional mirrorless cameras, and then you'll be set.
Yeah, which is funny. I mean, I feel like the reason even Lightroom has become so dominant as a post processor for photos is because it's simple, it's intuitive, it's these sliders, and you kind of, compared to something like how people used to do it maybe with like Photoshop, where you have all these features, you can do so much. Yeah. But then the actual implementation and using it is kind of frustrating.
Should we talk about Adobe on this podcast, or should we do another one?
Oh, the whole what?
The whole, like, well, it was the subscription scandal. So like they're being sued by the government right now because
we should save it for later. We should stay focused to the Lumix stuff, because we should go back to what you were talking about before, which was the Arri log profile in the GH7. Is that a worthy upgrade for $200?
I don't think so. Like I think it's funny watching people talk about it so much, because they're like, oh yeah, when I match this to my Arri. I'm like, what Arri? What are you shooting on an Arri? Okay, guy. If you're going to rent an Arri, you should probably rent another Arri in order to match it. So I think it's cute that they're like, oh yeah, you can use the same, you know, log profile. But also, if you have like a color chip chart, like you can just get accurate color. And I think that would probably amaze people more so than getting a LUT that makes it look like an Arri. It's like, no, just try to do it correctly, and then maybe, you know, dive into like a LUT or something. But I feel like people are like, oh yeah, like this sweet Band-Aid, it's going to make my footage look like an Arri. It's like, no, it's not. But I think it's cool. I think people have already figured out that look, though. Like there are already so many LUTs out there that are like $5. You can get them on Etsy for $5. It's like you already have that look. You don't need to spend $200 and get something that's officially their look. But then it's like, of course, it's not going to be an Arri.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty steep price to pay for licensing. Even the $100 Vlog L upgrade was $100 back on the GH5. And the frustrating thing they always ran into was needing that license for every single camera body you shoot with.
Yes.
If you're renting a camera or you have some other shooter, hey, I shoot Lumix too. Okay, do you have these extra profiles that I've spent money on? Because otherwise what ends up happening is it becomes really, really frustrating tracking it all down in post-production. Yeah. We run into this issue frequently, I would say, with the Sonys and all the different versions of S-Log1, S-Log2, S-Log3. They even have, is there S-Log4 now on some Sony bodies?
I haven't seen that.
Okay. But there's 1, 2, and 3, certainly. And so knowing, okay, well, which Sony camera shot this, which profile was it shot in, and were there any adjustments made to that? Because even if you're shooting S-Log3, I believe you can change other things like the gamut and the gamma.
Oh, yeah.
You can really mess up your footage or customize it to your preference. Yeah. But unless all that's hyper documented, The moment it gets handed off to post-production, they're going to slap a LUT on it and go, why does this look terrible?
Yes.
And the moment you have 2 or 3 cameras going, it's really hard to get that all to match properly without knowing up front what they did. And that's one of the other things I've really liked about the Lumix system is that it's been vlog forever. And that there might be better versions, and Arri, I think, is on C-Log 3 or 4 as well. And this is, I think, on the GH7, it's C-Log 3. And there was C-Log 2 and 1. There's all these profiles we're now tracking down. If I'm spending more to get them on certain cameras, but I don't have access to them on other cameras, because let's say I got a GH7, I start shooting with this Arri profile. How do I mix with the G9 Mark II? How do I mix with the S5 Mark II? How do I mix with the GH6? I'm just going to default back to Vlog because they all have it.
It is, whenever I shoot with Sony, I shoot S-Log 3, and most people know how to use that footage and like use the LUTs and everything, and that's fine. It is interesting whenever I shoot Lumix, and we've both shot more Lumix footage than anything else, but it's more internally. Like we shoot Lumix and work on our own projects. When I do a project for somebody else and I happen to use a Lumix camera, nobody really knows about Vlog or editing in Vlog, so it's always like a curveball. Like, wait, where do I get this LUT? And then I was like, oh, shit. Like then I have to explain to them like Vlog, and it's just like, oh, okay, it's different. Okay, yeah, but I don't know. Are you curious about like the baked-in LUTs? I know you keep referring to them, which I've never had to use them. Like the real-time LUTs.
Yeah. So theoretically, what you can do, and I have to test this. This is all conceptual at this phase. There's a plugin for Premiere, for DaVinci, for all of them. I think called Cinematch.
Yes.
I think
you were showing me that for the...
Which is really cool.
DJI.
And I needed it to match DJI footage to Lumix footage. It would work for GoPro, works Nikon, Sony. It has all these color profiles built in. It doesn't have all of them, but it has a good amount of them. And what you can do is you can convert from one profile to another. And this is a lot easier to do in something like DaVinci Resolve, because I believe they use CSTs. They're color science tables or something like that. Resolve is a much better program for color than Premiere is. But for a lot of reasons, we still need to use Premiere.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a $100 plugin workaround for Premiere to get your footage to match. And there's a few people who talk about it on YouTube, content creators. So I was like, I'll give it a shot. It's $100. And I was able to get the DJI and the Lumix footage to match pretty well. But then you can also do things like you can convert Vlog to Arri C-Log. So you can do that. And then you can apply all those Arri LUTs. Well, you can also export a cube file. So what you can theoretically do is convert Vlog to C-Log, have your cube file, put that back and load it into the camera as a LUT, a real-time LUT, and you could bake that in theory.
Interesting.
That might cause some problems. I don't know. And I don't know of a good reason to do it, because you can always do it in post.
Yeah.
But if you wanted
to get the look on the camera,
on camera
set, that would be ideal.
If you wanted to, like, if you knew you were going to a shoot where it's all Arri and you just want to match and plug into the monitor or whatever, you could do that, I suppose. But the real-time LUT...
Well, I think a lot of clients don't know what it should look like. Like, a lot of times they'll see, like, a flat image and they're like, what's wrong? They don't know what happened. Then you have to educate them.
But I do like this, plugin, the software, because you can do things like match Sony and Lumix a lot easier, more scientific than, hand grading. And like I said, if you're using Resolve, it's probably way easier anyway, and you might not even need it. But in Premiere, I've always struggled with, I know what these cameras are, but getting them to actually match is usually the harder part of the equation, unless you have something that just kind of knows all that science, which is all built in. So theoretically, you can use real-time LUT to kind of convert one log to another in camera, and that way your footage would just come. So you could theoretically shoot S-Log 3 on a Lumix camera.
Interesting.
If you wanted, if you make the right cube file.
That'd be ridiculous. But that'd be convenient.
And I want to say the cube files need to be, because even this gets super complicated tracking, because there's the different, is it bits? There's like 33 cube, 64, 18. I think they need to be 31 is the max for the Lumix camera. I think. I'm just going off memory at this point. The real-time LUT is more, marketed as a counterpoint to Fuji's,
Yes.
film science, film emulation. So you can just get your kind of film look right in camera. Your JPEGs can have it all built in, which I guess is neat. But there's so many apps now that just let you add filters. That the moment I'm going through those steps, why would I want to bake it in? And I know some people really love that, but it's never sold me where I'm like, oh, I can't wait to shoot with this really goofy color and just bake it in.
I mean, other than just doing live streams, but you could just load LUTs in general.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need that, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's more clever, cool things you can do with converting the log profiles. I think that's more how I would use it in certain situations. I'm glad it exists because it does kind of make certain things a little bit easier where you're trying to mix different camera systems.
Yeah, it'd be very difficult to grade like a DJI camera without like a pretty big chip chart. At least that's what I've found, like grading footage with like chip charts, because I have like the Color Passport, the smaller one, and there are big ones that you can buy, but they're pretty expensive, and it is easier, pointing different cameras to one big source and like making sure you get the color accurate. But I've always thought about this, especially when it comes to like matching all your cameras, because we've talked about using different lenses, different filters, and defilters can like skew.
Everything affects the color.
Yeah. So it's like, even though you have your same white balance theoretically dialed in, you could still end up with drastically different color based on, lenses, filters. So recently I was watching a video where this guy was basically saying, don't ever shoot custom white balance, because according to this guy, and I maybe I'm leaning into this thinking because I have been getting better results by using this practice, but essentially just like dialing in your camera at 5500 and mainly only shooting it like that in natural situations, right? And like you can introduce daylight bulbs, but for this guy specifically, he was talking about how if you shoot like a custom white balance, like you're more often going to run into issues in post-processing with color if it's not like a completely like dialed in situation, right? Which totally makes sense, because at like a sunset, for instance, if you shoot your white balance card at sunset,
yes,
you're just going to ruin your white balance completely, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you can't really get an accurate white balance unless it's like the middle of the day with no clouds, essentially, right? It's like the true color. So thinking about this, I was like, well, what if you just brought your camera into like a dark room, right? And then had like an accurate light source and just shot, your color checker, and then made all your LUTs from there. But in my mind, I'm like, you'd have to do every lens, every filter and all that. But, theoretically you could add all those profiles in, but it would just be kind of ridiculous. But I've found recently, by filming at like 5500 and then like adjusting my colors for that specifically, because I made a LUT that was like, I actually did this, by the way. So like I made a LUT specifically for this one chip chart, 5500, and for the most part it looks a lot better than shooting a white balance card in an area where I'm like, all right, this is white, because it's like a gray card, but I still have to fix it after the fact. So I'm like, I don't so more recently I've been less shooting my chip chart white balance portion and just keeping my camera at 55 and then shooting my chip chart so that I can adjust the colors later in post. But I haven't been doing a custom white balance, right? If that makes sense.
Sure. And I can imagine in certain situations that might get you better, more accurate color. Because certainly, like, depending on the lighting of the environment, the light bulbs themselves might be like
not
bad.
accurate.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the situation where I was kind of like putting myself in, right? So like there are some establishments that have daylight color, or it could be tungsten, whatever, but for the most part daylight, but then the accuracy of those lights
the CRI
terrible.
Might be terrible.
Yeah.
The only thing the custom white balance solve for me, and the biggest thing I would say, is if you're shooting by yourself, absolutely do it this new way that you're using, but to match two cameras.
To match cameras, yeah.
That was always the game changer for me of shooting custom white balance, is that ever since we started doing that, I struggled far less with matching color, because in
It's
the
in the
past,
ballpark.
it gets you imperceptibly close enough, and with a small adjustment, even if you want to, it's not even necessary. Versus in the past, or on a lot of shoots still to this day, hey, what's your white balance? 5500. Okay,
yeah.
cool. I'm at 5500 too.
Yes.
I'm using a different lens,
Right.
a different filter, and inevitably the footage would come back. Even if we were both shooting GH6 and we're 5500, yeah, we would still be wildly off.
Right.
And the moment we started, hey, let's take a custom white balance off this wall or off this,
But
chip chart. That solved all of those problems. And then at that point, if I want to make the color better, I just have my final color grade over everything.
Yeah.
And I'm fixing both cameras at the same time.
See,
if it is a problem.
Yeah, I would agree that our colors have looked a lot better from doing that. But you know that we take multiple readings because sometimes we do it and it just doesn't look right.
Yeah.
And you can do it multiple times. It's the same, like you're framing up just the gray card, right? Take it and you're just like, it looks off.
Yep.
But what frustrates me the most is that it doesn't tell you what it's doing to the image. It just says custom. It doesn't say 2 magenta, 2 green. It doesn't tell you
On
exactly
Lumix,
what it's
it doesn't,
doing.
yeah.
So like that's what
On
frustrates
Sony it
me.
does, I want to say.
Yeah, I think it does.
Sony will tell you,
But like
on the newer ones.
that's the issue that I think is a huge, flag because I'm just like, well, like there's no sense of if this is way off or not.
Yeah.
Like at least if I was like, this looks green, and then you can check and be like, wow, that is way green. Like I can see it. It tells me.
Yeah.
But
well,
now
thankfully
it's
with
like,
the monitors, you can check the waveforms
you can do that, yeah.
and see like, okay, is this white?
Yeah.
Or is it wrong?
And a new thing I have been doing, for months now, is like specifically shooting the chip chart because I know it's like, if it is slightly off, because there have been times where I've shot, a location multiple times, but depending on if it's time of day or not, it will look slightly different. So I'm just like, well, at least if I shoot the chip chart, I can more or less get the different days to look correct because at least the footage from each day is correct because I shot the chip chart.
Yeah. There's always a few different ways, and it's picking the right. Even with the cameras, we talk about, which is the best camera. And it depends what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. We did that photo shoot where we were shooting all Sony because it was the A7R. It's like, okay, we need the megapixels. This is for print. So there's always a reason to do it a different way. But one thing that I feel like a lot of people miss is that custom white balance, specifically with multiple cameras. If you're shooting by yourself, it doesn't really matter what you're doing.
No, there's nothing to compare it to.
If you're shooting photo, video, if you're by yourself, you have your camera, you have your gear, you have your process. If you can get from start to finish and makes it look good, I don't really care how you do it.
It does still bother me,
Any time
though.
where it's a team and it's this guy does it this way, this person does it that way, this person does it some other weird way.
I shoot 4,500.
And now
I do
we've
it
all got to
in
get on the
post.
same page, and you're trying to mix, okay, Sony with Lumix, with Nikon, with Canon, with someone who, I just set my white balance to 4,500
I told
and
you
leave it.
I was on a shoot. It was a food shoot, and that just blew my mind. I was like, but you have control of your lights. He's like, oh yeah, 45 though, 45. That's the secret sauce. And I'm like, that's the secret sauce? I guess if you have a colorist, it could be the secret sauce.
Yeah, and for me, my biggest gripe has always been like, okay, how do we get everyone's personal preferences to kind of work together? What are the workflows and procedures we can do to make this more or less bulletproof to where anyone can kind of hop in or hop out, or we can hand it off to editing and it kind of takes care of itself. And there's not all the custom, if this person did it this way, and can you do, because it's so much wasted time. The efficiency is lost when you're relying on everyone's personal preference.
Yeah.
And there's no unified workflow of here's how we do it, so we kind of save each other from our own kind of preferences.
Yeah. And I feel like, well, at least what I've seen recently, because you were showing me the bear, and it looked very like blue, which for a food show, I would think they would want the colors to be more like accurate to what the food should look like. But overall, the show just has this like hue of just like a blue toned show, which is fine. But it's funny when you see like ads for restaurants, and it's just like, oh, that doesn't look like appetizing or whatever. And it's, content that somebody went and shot. But you would think it's like, well, just like make sure it's like color accurate. But that's like the last thing people like think about, I guess, is color. They want like the visuals to look cool. It's like, oh yeah, the dynamic camera, but then color. It's like, just get your color right, and theoretically, like your actual footage would look better too.
Yeah, which is much more of like a commercial thing.
Yeah. Well,
we shoot that Coca-Cola Red is.
We shoot bread a lot, and getting bread to look like bread is pretty difficult depending on the lighting, because it's very specific tone of like beige, you know, and it's very difficult to get that tone. But luckily, you know, if you do read your scopes, you know, your vector scopes or anything, you should be able to get it pretty accurate. But again, shooting the chip chart really helps. But
so I'm not buying the GH7 at this point in time. Are you picking one up?
I eventually would like to get one, only because, like I was saying, like the podcast aspect of it, and just to see how good that workflow really works, as far as like being able to plug in some mics, have people just yell, scream, whatever, whisper, and then I want to be able to see what that post processing actually looks like. An issue I ran into recently with the GH6 was somebody was making proxies for me, and they couldn't make proxies correctly because when you add that like 4-channel adapter, then all of a sudden you can't do like small resolution proxies for some whatever reason.
H264, yeah.
Yeah, so
only has 2 channels.
So
audio,
I'm like, what is the deal there? Like, is it going to be the same issue with the GH7 and like that workflow with the 32-bit float? So I kind of want to figure everything out, because if it's not going to make, like, if it's not going to streamline my process, then probably not.
So it depends. I could troubleshoot the exact problem you were having, but I do know that in the past when I've done that on the GH6, having 4 channels of audio, making proxies, there is a bug with Premiere that when it's opening, it can't relink. It has a hard time. It says, hey, this is what you have to do is open Premiere entirely, get like offline your stuff.
So not an encoder at all?
No, this is not, like, I've just made my proxies in the normal way. H264, you know, send them, because I don't actually do the proxy feature in Premiere. It's a separate export, because it's just drag and drop the folder, use like YouTube settings or whatever you want, match or low, medium, whatever. Make your proxies however you want. They will have 2 channels of audio, and when you go to relink the 2 to the 4, Premiere, when it's opening, because whenever you're opening a project, Premiere is like, let's link all this stuff up. And then it says, hey, I can't. And you say, no, this is the relink to this master file. And it says, there's an issue. All you got to do, just offline and say, fine, offline it. Get Premiere all the way open.
Didn't want it anyway.
Get Premiere all the way open, and then go link your footage back to the full res, and it finds it just fine.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
It's not a problem.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
It's super goofy, and it's probably a weird, I'm probably the only person, or now you, like, we're the only ones who've ever had to deal with this one bug. Yeah. But
yeah, the 4-channel, 2-channel bug, whether if it's a Premiere thing. Okay. So,
and it's, again, only when it's opening.
Gotcha.
So it's really confusing, because everyone's trying to open a project, and they immediately hit this and they say, hey, this is broken.
All right, I'll figure that out.
Just make it to the fully open stage, and the problem will sort itself out.
Aside from that, I would like to know what the new workflow would be with 32-bit float, because I've dabbled with that audio before in doing like voiceover stuff, but specifically only audio. So I'd be interested to see what it actually sounds like if I'm shooting 32-bit float with like maybe a shotgun mic and a lav mic, and like introducing like more than one kind of situation to capture audio while doing video. I know you came up with this interesting rig where you had your DJI mic on like a pole sticking far. I don't know. Did that end up working?
Yeah, it works.
Do you still use it, or?
If I need to.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the product that you were recreating?
So Zacuto has a product called the Micro Boom. I think this doesn't exist, but I get ads for it all the time on Instagram. It's a telescoping rod that is what it sounds like. It's a micro boom pole.
Yes.
So my problem with boom poles is that you need an operator to hold them, but I've always wanted just off the camera a pole, but tiny. And that's what this product is. And you put a little microphone, lightweight. A lot of microphones now are very lightweight.
Yes.
Even a lav mic at the end. It's like getting it from me to you is a lot better than just the on-camera audio, which we've always...
Or a boom. like a boom mic, a shotgun mic on your camera, it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah, you want it close to your subject, which we've always said. Even years ago, we'd always look at people's setups, and they'd have the shotgun mic on the camera across the room from their talent. You're not going to get good audio. You need some kind of boom to get there. So Zacuto has a micro boom. They advertise it all the time on Instagram. I think it's like $150 or something like that. But it's been back ordered forever. It's been pre-order only. Go to B&H, and so I did. I was like, sure, yeah. If you ship it in like the next month or so, yeah. Waiting. Still getting ads. Hey, buy this thing. Buy this. And I don't know if they're just like harvesting as many pre-orders as they can, so then they can go finally make it in China or wherever it is. But eventually, I think it's been probably a year since I first like bought it.
Oh my god!
And maybe they're shipping now. I don't know. But regardless, I was like, well, ultimately, if this is just a pole, like just a tiny little point, that kind of it's telescoping. It reminds me of back in the day when I was a kid. My dad had this like pen pointer. It was like the ballpoint pen, and it would extend, and you could use it as like a pointer for presentations. It's like an 80s or 90s gadget. It's kind of a gimmick. Like you'd get it like as like a swag or whatever, or just as a thing that everybody had. This ballpoint pen pointer. Well, I wonder if they have those still. So I look it up on Amazon. Sure enough, you can get 2 for like $10. And they're just these pointers that extend, and they're really lightweight. I think they're made of aluminum probably. And they get plenty long. You can just set the length. And I'm looking at the end of it, and it's, the holder. I'm like, that kind of looks like the same size as those 15 millimeter rods.
The rods, yeah.
So I buy the Arri rosette mount with like a 15 mil clamp adapter, and I put this, and it fits perfectly. It's like the perfect setup. So all you need to do is just figure out how to get a microphone on the end, and then you can attach that to your camera, and you can run around for, it probably cost me with the rosette and everything, maybe like $50 total to get the right components. But if you have them already, you could certainly rig it out however you like. But now that gets me my microphone a lot closer to my subject, which we've talked a lot about, is just for me, the value is just sound effects almost all the time. Someone doing something, pouring something, cutting something, having that microphone close but not in frame. In an easy way that I can do all by myself.
Yeah, and it's that combined with, I think, the 32-bit float, because you can plug it into that new XLR adapter. It has like the 3.5 millimeter jack. So theoretically, you could get like the softest of, chops or whatever it is. And then you can get the super loud, banging of pots and pans. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in. And you can't do it on the GH6. So I don't know another camera that can do that without having like another separate audio that you have to sync and post. So
which is the whole thing, because everyone will say, oh, just buy this microphone. It has it built in. I think even the new DJI Mic 2 is 32-bit float.
Internal recording.
Internal. But then that's syncing, and that's the other layer of post-production. It's more time, less efficient. So I do like it. It's just a little misleading to say, hey, you get this feature on the GH7 that, you have to pay $500 for. Hey, now you can shoot with the Arri log profile, but that's an extra $200. And both of those, so $700 extra to get the full features of the camera. And for me, all I really wanted was an internal electronic ND. Because that would actually change things of how I shoot. I can get by with 24-bit audio.
It doesn't
16-bit audio, whatever it is.
The ND doesn't change as much for me, because I'm fine using my variable or my UU rig adapter. Like I'm totally fine. Yeah, I don't know. I'm okay with it.
Less filters.
Like it's not ideal, but it's not an issue. Like the batteries for me is not an issue. Like totally fine swapping batteries because I like the form factor of the camera to, be smaller. Like I don't want to put a huge V mount on my, there was a time that I wanted my camera to look as big as possible. It made me look more professional. Now I try to be like as small as possible because I don't want to be noticed. A lot of the stuff we do is like run and gun, and you already get enough looks by having any kind of equipment. So it's like you want to be kind of low profile.
Yeah. For me, the battery is just a momentum thing. Half the time to switch a battery, unless it's in your pocket, and even then,
I keep 3 in my pocket because they're so small.
Switching batteries is like a minute interruption.
1 minute. That's it. That's all.
That's a momentum killer. No. And if
Plus
you have to go,
sounds cool. Like turning off. You would see those like like, I don't know, like a army, like, montage where they're like getting ready, they're like grabbing all their guns.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
It's the coolest
I
moment.
want the all-day battery.
Reload.
And also, you're talking about, because you, I know, have the battery for the monitor and for the camera.
The monitor lasts basically all day. I've never had an issue with like the smaller battery. You could put a bigger one on there, but that's overkill. The small one lasts all day. You just have to remember to turn it off when you're not using it. I feel like that's one of the things. Oh my God. I was on a shoot where I had like my rig multiplied by 3. One of the 2 other guys knew how to operate their equipment correctly, and it was fine. They maintained their batteries throughout the multiple days of shooting.
Yeah.
The other one just never turns their system off in downtime, and I'm like, your camera's on, not recording more times than you are recording when the camera is on, and that's not right.
Yeah. I like to take human error out of the equation, not rely on people remembering things or... I would say half of shooters don't even show up with their batteries charged.
Yes.
They're showing up and they're going, hey, I need to plug this into charge. And then they're swapping and running back and forth. And you're saying you've mentally prepared it, which is great. It's
yes.
top tier.
I
You're
am a
elite
professional.
status. Yes.
Yes.
You got your batteries charged, got them in your pockets, 1 minute change. I've been on shoots where it's like, hey, I need to switch batteries, but they have to go to the charger.
I gotta go get my keys to go to my car.
Right. And a battery change that should take even 30 seconds at best ends up taking maybe 10 minutes because they got to walk, they got to swap.
And what really happens is they have to get their charger, plug it in, grab another battery that might be 25%.
Yep.
Wait for that battery to charge.
Swapping. Yeah. And that happens too often. So it's one of those things where you can complain about it and try and get everyone on the same page and force people, no, you need to do this. But I know that 50% of the time, the human is going to make the mistake. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather go with a solution or a system that I can say, here you go.
Yeah.
It's basically dummy proof.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about you. Mm-hmm. We're just going to go white balance off that card right there and we're good to go. Mm-hmm. Don't mess up.
And then
they still do.
And then
they still do.
And then they're like, this looks really green. Perfect.
Sweet. But yeah, it's GH7. It's a promising camera that I'll probably pick up once. And maybe there's another $500 discount one day. Maybe I'll get one. But I'm actually more excited to try the S5 Mark II and tap into some of those like full frame, the theoretical benefits of full frame, and see if that ends up working a little bit better. The G9 Mark II, it's fine. It overheats. The GH6 still gets the job done if I really need it to, but the GH7, it finally checks a lot of those boxes that people have wanted, but I think it's a little bit too little, too late. I need either more features or a cheaper price because it's, what is it, 2024?
Honestly,
like we've been struggling with these things, and they're finally like, now you finally have it. Well, but we've also got all this other new full frame stuff.
The XLR2 adapter, is that going to work on full frame cameras?
I believe so. They've been pretty good.
I feel like that should just be like a firmware update.
Yeah.
But that is actually the one thing that they added that keeps me like on the fence. Because if they didn't announce that feature, I probably already would have bought the GH7 because I'm like, yes, this is an upgrade from the GH6.
It is better, yeah.
But then they introduced this new thing where I'm like 32-bit float direct to camera. Are you going to put that in your full frame camera? Because if that's the case, then I might get rid of all Sony. Unless Sony ups their game and is like...
starts doing shutter angle and open gate.
And open gate, yeah.
I don't know.
So we'll see. Because, if Sony was like, we've heard about this square sensor situation, it's like, oh yeah, maybe redesign your sensor.
It's fine. They must, at this point, I think all these companies know it must be an intentional choice.
GoPro did it intentionally. They were the first people that I saw advertising it intentionally. Right. Crop your content vertical and horizontal. Mm-hmm. So I would think Sony would be like, oh yeah, but everyone's used to turning their cameras to their side, to shoot vertical content.
Yeah.
But I feel like at that point, and it is something that we ran into a long time ago. We were shooting stuff for Tabasco, and we were framing certain content vertically on purpose because it's very difficult to do something very intentional vertically and make it look good for horizontal. So I feel like there's a certain like level of, I don't know whether it's like budget or like execution, where you're like, no, like we only want vertical. Like you don't need to shoot, the whole open gate. Like we only want this. So if you're paying for only that, I could see why even like a company like Sony would be like, just turn your camera, get your full resolution vertically. Like that's it.
Yeah.
So
there's always different ways to slice it, but I think nowadays the demands for multimedia across all the different platforms, you never know how something's going to get repurposed or repackaged.
Yeah.
For me, it's kind of better safe than sorry. But yeah, there might be times where the client says, "No, I need you to shoot a vertical to make me feel safe." You go, okay, I'll turn my camera. Sure.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll probably buy it.